Hello, friends. Hope you're doing well. Hello, Mr. James. Hope you're doing well today. We're going to start soon. We're going to wait for a few more people to come in, and we're going to talk about the OWASP API Top 10 today. Previously, we've talked about the first two chapters, API 0, which I like to call, which is kind of describing what an API is, and also API 1. Today we're going to talk about API 2 through whatever we're going to get to. And again, I would like to hear it from you. Mostly I'm going to talk a little bit, but if any of you guys have anything to say, I would be more than happy to hear it. You guys are a big inspiration for me. So, and by the way, one lesson that I want to give you today is question your mentors, even me, of course. You should always question the people you look up to. Now, let's talk about OWASP API Top 10, shall we? Again, if anybody has anything to say, either in the YouTube live stream or in the chat, feel free to just request, like Mr. QK9 is doing right now. So, hello, Mr. QK9. How are you doing? I can't hear you really well. Maybe you can speak up a little bit. Anyway, if you have anything to say, feel free to unmute yourself and stop me. If anybody else has anything to say, feel free to request to be a speaker. We're going to talk about API 2019 Broken User Authentication. Now, what really is broken user authentication? Because it's kind of a funky name, don't you think? First of all, let's digest that a little bit. Broken user authentication. User authentication, you have authorization and authentication. So authentication is going to say, hey, am I allowed to be logged in or not? This is about that, about logging in, not about, hey, am I allowed to access this feature or not? This can manifest in several ways. And whenever we come across like an API endpoint that handles authentication, you need to be extra careful with those endpoints, of course. And especially as pen testers, we need to put a lot of attention into those endpoints, in my opinion, because a lot of things can go wrong. For example, if your API allows for credential stuffing, if you don't know what credential stuffing is, it's an attack where a hacker will try to brute force credentials by using a list of known account names and passwords from other websites. So there might have been a leaked list, and the attacker is going to use that list because people are creatures of habit. They will reuse the same password and username on different websites often, and that's what attackers will then take use of. So you have to at least have something like CAPTCHA or rate limiting or throttling or anything to not allow those attackers to just go through that list as quick as possible. You really have to put a stop to that very soon. And if your API endpoint doesn't verify that CAPTCHA whenever it's needed, even if it's implemented, then that's still pretty useless. It's also useless if your client, if your target allows for weak passwords. Now, these are usually not things you can report as bug bounty hunters, but as pen testers, these are very important. Make sure you check the out of scope section of your bug bounty target. You can also, when the endpoint, use a get parameter, for example, and it sends sensitive data such as passwords or tokens or whatever. Now, usually those things are sent in a post request because if the attacker is able to decrypt that URL, they have that token. It's not very likely, but still, it's advised to do it in a post request. It's definitely not required. Whenever our endpoint doesn't validate things, like JWT issues might be at play here, where the JWT algorithm is set to is accepting none as an algorithm, and that's something that you don't want. Of course, you always want the JWT endpoint to check the proper algorithm, check the proper password. Very important. Also, a possibility whenever your endpoint doesn't encrypt or hash the password or use like a weak algorithm, because I don't know if you guys have noticed, but MD5 has gone out of fashion recently, and it's become kind of a weak algorithm, and especially if you don't salt the target, the password, I mean, of course. Weak encryption keys can be used as well. Things that are easy to guess, passwords that are easy to guess, birthdays, things like that. Of course, that's an issue, but that's not something you can really do anything about. Even as a even as a developer, you're not going to be able to do much about that. But things like I don't know which site, but recently I was registering on a site, and he said you can't use that because it contains part of your name. That's a very smart way of handling passwords, in my opinion. And I don't know if you guys know this, but the guy that invented the whole password system, really funny. He's kind of regretting that he's invented that right now because passwords turn out to be an issue. People forget them, people use weak passwords. It's kind of a headache, he says. Now, of course, biometrics are silently replacing that. Face scans, fingerprint scanners, those things are silently coming into our lives. And that's a good thing, in my opinion, as well, because it's going to be much harder to fake a fingerprint. But then again, you don't know what technology is being used there, so it's very possible that it's hackable. And in the old days, you used to have things like phone phreaking on all of that stuff. Well, now you have things like this and things like blockchain hacking and IoT hacking. So we are also pioneers in a way, which is something that I really appreciate, to be able to be at the forefront of my field. And it's something that, like, for these kind of things, we need more people to do much more research into, I think. Because the black hats, they are definitely doing research into the new technologies, and I think white hats should try to take it onto themselves to try at least do some research into it as well. Now, it's not easy, I get that, but it's, if anybody has any opinions on that, feel free to tell me about it. I'd love to hear them. If not, I'll give you guys some examples. Password recoveries that might be weak. For example, iDoors and password recoveries. Well, that falls under this category. By the way, if you guys don't know, OWASP API top 10 is categories. It's not issue types, it's categories. So like password recovery with an IDOR in it, JWT validation, which accepts the non-algorithm. I've already talked about that. So there's many different things in which this can manifest itself. Now, as for preventative measures, if you're a developer, it's really important to map all the flows that are related to authentication and make sure that you list anything like mobile, deep links, one-click logins, or what, all of that stuff. It's very important that you list it, understand how it works, and don't implement your own authentication methods, but use well-known ones, because you can try to make that stuff yourself, but there are experts at work that have created the well-known authentication mechanisms for years, and they have years of experience. So I'm not going to trust myself. I'm going to use their technology. I also recommend using the OWASP authentication cheat sheet. It's a great reference for implementing authentication. And if possible, use multi-factor authentication, but know that phone and SMS, that has kind of gone out of fashion as well. It's not being used much, or at least it's recommended to not being used anymore, because I think the phone numbers are not safe anymore or something like that. I haven't really looked into it. Also, don't use API keys for authentication of the users. API keys should always be reserved for client app authentication. You might think, Uncle Red, that's a crazy one. Why would you say that? You'd be surprised at what you find at the client side. I'm not gonna say more because of privilege, but of course. A conclusion, when dealing with authentication endpoints, you really need to make sure that you implement much stricter security mechanisms than when dealing with normal endpoints. That's something that's normal, of course. And we need to make sure that we have good rate limiting, lockouts, CAPTCHA, everything that is required to keep the endpoint secure. It's really important, and as pen tester, you should also report on these issues if you find them. And as a developer, it's really recommended to use that OWASP authentication cheat sheet. I don't know if anybody has any comments on this one. This was quite a mouthful, so if you have any comments, I would love to hear them. I'm going to take a sip of my delicious coffee right now. Oh, yummy. So that's Starbucks coffee, by the way. Starbucks coffee beans, I love them. The Pike Place medium roast. The API 3, excessive data exposure. Excessive data exposure, what the heck does that mean, right? Let me quickly check the live stream. We have some comments there as well. Hello, Zoe. Nice to see you. OWASP is really a really good. It's a really good reference that I always go back to, Jaden. Authentication, which is not sanitized, that's also something that's important. Hello, Mr. Script. I hope you're doing well. And James Beers, I was testing a post request to an API with sign up, and it responds with all of the variables that can be set instead of just the variables that were set. Is it normal, or should I try to fuzz the variables? Well, we'll get to that one later because there's also a category for that one. Great discovery there, James. Let's move on to the next point, API 3, excessive data exposure. So what that really means, excessive data exposure, is when an API returns more data than it's supposed to return. Like you have usually a front end, and the front end is going to make a call to an API. The API is going to make a response, and in the response it's going to put some fields, some parameters in there. But sometimes it just returns way too much, and that's not okay. I'm gonna give you guys an example soon. Hey Rami, how are you doing, my friend? That's not good. If you're silent, that's usually you should at least be breathing or something, or maybe you're muted.
Hey, Ratankan, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Pleasure to meet you.
There were a problem with your mic. That's why I sent the request.
Still a problem with my microphone?
No, I hear you now. It's crystal clear.
Awesome. Thank you. If there's any problem, feel free to interrupt me.
It's all great.
Do you have do you have any thoughts about the previous thing we talked about, the broken user authentication?
I quit, to be honest. It was late, and it's like it's 12:20.
Oh,
Yeah.
good night, my friend.
No, yeah, I just saw the room and I tried to join. I like it.
Oh, definitely. Welcome. So what broken user authentication basically means is that anything in the login system is broken. But what you usually see is that pen testers get to report a lot more than bug bounty hunters, right? Do you have any experience with that?
Nope.
It's like I've seen bug bounty hunters, usually it's out of scope to report anything like rate limiting and things like lockout missing, but then SQL injection is in scope again, so it's not like there's nothing, you know? It's like there's at least something, but you have to be careful that you can't report everything as a bug bounty hunter, in my opinion. And the same goes for excessive data exposure, which is API number 3, which is when the API returns way too much data. Let's talk about you have a system where you enter your credit card data. And the front end is going to display the credit card number, at least part of the credit card number, and the expiry date. Well, the backend, the API, might return the full CVV, credit card number, ID, validation, and all of that data that's not supposed to be seen in the front end. Well, that's a big problem, of course, because if a hacker is able to intercept that data by performing a man-in-the-middle attack, for example, he's going to have a lot of valuable data that's not supposed to be seen even. And the reason the user is not seeing that in the API is for their protection. They don't want to see that in the API only when they enter a password or something because of a man-in-the-middle attack possibility. And those things can be very damaging to an application, especially if you don't, like for me, hackspur.com, for the longest time it wasn't even HTTPS, it was just HTTP. So that would have been a problem if I would have returned excessive data. Now, of course, I do return excessive data because I have a lab on it, but that's just a laboratory. That's different, of course. If you guys want, I will also link that. I'll tweet that out later this evening after I'm done here. Now, preventative measures, what can you do about this? You should never rely on your client to filter out any data. The API just shouldn't send back that data. You should review all, of course, that's easy said than done because an API might return thousands of responses. But it's up to you to catalog them and to prioritize them and to see which ones have that important data. And then you should see what data they return, and you should evaluate if they should return that exact data. That's very important, because if they do return too much data, back to development it goes, and have them remove all of the data that shouldn't be there. Of course, be careful, because sometimes developers, they take an object, they throw it into a generic method like to JSON or to string or something like that, and then all of the data will be returned. That's something that happens sometimes, and that's how these issues can arise, of course. But don't be fooled by that. Don't use those functions. Always only return the object items that you need. Hello, Mr. Knock Knock. How are you doing? You should be able to speak now, my friend. Feel free to interrupt me if you have anything to say. For the conclusion on this issue type, it's just that just way too much information. That's all I can say. Hey, Knock Knock, I can hear you now.
Hey, thank you. Like you should.
How are you doing, my friend?
Phenomenal. How about you?
I'm doing good, thank you.
Glad to hear it, bro.
Have you had any experience with these, like for example APIs that return way too much data, or if you've hacked like a login system or something like that?
No, not yet. I'm just still gathering information.
Awesome, good job on that. I really like. I always say that you're always lapping people that are sitting on the couch, so that's definitely a great thing. And about the API top 10, it's definitely useful for pen testers and also for bug bounty hunters in a way. But you just have to be able to look through it, in my opinion, and not take things at face value. Dig into them like we've been doing right now. Like for example, API 4 lack of rate limiting, you might see that there's certain overlap between other issues. By the way, Knock Knock, I'm gonna mute you for a second. There's a bit of noise there.
Sure, go ahead.
There we go. So the lack of rate limiting, very, very simple issue type, of course. Whenever an API serves a request, that request gets a response from that API, and that response, you can sometimes just spam the API completely. And for some requests that might not matter too much, for some it matters quite a lot. It's important for this issue type. Like an example that I can give is, these are very simple ones, of course. If you have a document that you're creating and there's no rate limit on that creation of the document, you might be able to spam the hard disk full in a matter of minutes. That's not good, of course. I don't think that anybody would like that. So you should always implement rate limiting, preferably lockouts and captchas wherever possible, but don't overcomplicate things either, because your client will not be thankful if you have some issues there. Of course, if you, let's see, my friend wants to speak here. And also what I wanted to say is, you should probably use a Docker container if possible, because they have a built-in flag such as -m to determine exactly how much memory every container can consume. That will limit it somewhat, at least. Hello, Mr. Gannigan, how are you doing?
Hi, thexssrat. How are you, man?
I'm
You
good,
having a
thank
good day?
you.
I'm good too. How's it going?
It's going great. I've had a good evening. I've been trying to do some research and building like cross-site scripting lab that you guys can hack. Thanks to
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have anything to say about the OWASP API top 10?
Well, I haven't done API testing as that much as possible, but sorry, no inputs, is it?
No, it's not a problem. I think it's great input, because a lot of people think they haven't been doing API testing yet, but API testing is more than just meets the eye. Almost everything is an API: application, programming, interface. And like a lot of the, I'm talking about web APIs, of course. A lot of the web technologies these days are server client. And if you're like using Burp Suite to intercept requests and responses, you're basically talking to an API. Did you know that?
Yes, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Well, coming for the API testing, most of the test cases are related to the web pen testing as well, right?
It depends, yes, because there's also
Yeah.
things like
Yeah.
IoT APIs. There's like many different types of APIs, of course, but these days it's still predominantly web APIs, I would say.
True. Mostly I interact with web API itself. I haven't got the opportunity to go
Oh.
with IoT or any other.
And also mobile APIs, by the way, those are also coming up strong.
Yeah, that's true. And
Yeah.
how do you find hacking with the API with web and IoT? If you have done IoT, I would really like to know.
It's basically like you have to just intercept, well, I say just, but it's not easy, of course. You have to be able to intercept the traffic some way. So for some of these devices, you're able to, for example, set a proxy. And I prefer if the devices run on Android because Android is basically like mobile testing. You do SSL certificate pin bypass on these applications and
Yep.
you can intercept the traffic. But you have to do that on your fridge, which is not easy, of course. It's like
That's true. I use Frida to unblock the applications for Android and for IoT. I'm using Secrets, Docker OS X at the no. I'm using Corellium. Corellium is a directly hosted environment where you can use the mobile application for testing purpose.
I didn't know that. Thank you. Gonna check it out later on.
It has a trial day for 7 days. You can use that. The mobile devices are hosted on cloud, so you can easily get access for that.
Thanks. Didn't know that. That's a great suggestion also for the viewers, of course. Let's see.
It is there.
For me, it's like API hacking is really interesting topic because, like you say, it's so broad and
Yeah.
there's more and more APIs coming up because people need to interact with APIs. It's as simple as that. Everything needs to interact with APIs to a degree. And if it doesn't, it's probably not communicating with backend. But intercepting that traffic, that's a whole other story. And a lot of people think you can, for example, only use Burp Suite or Zap Proxy or whatever. But there's more proxies than those. Just saying. It's not that you directly have to. They don't always repeat the traffic like Burp Suite does and Zap does. But what they do is these they they at least read the traffic so you can build it afterwards in Postman yourself. I used Postman a lot for API hacking because I can make a
Me too.
workspace. It's a great, right? Such a
Yeah,
useful
it
tool.
is.
And
Indeed, you can use everything in there.
they just
And
I didn't know if you see that, but they brought up a new update where you can make flows and WebSocket requests as well. So now Postman has WebSockets. Why would I ever need to use another program, right?
yeah, that's true, right. I haven't got the opportunity to mostly interact with WebSockets, but true that if something coming up with really Postman, that's really great for to do that. And really enjoy doing with Postman collection. If the environment is having a Postman collection, you can do the testing straight away.
If you enjoy Postman, you should check out the new workflows. It's like you can connect your requests in a logical way, like request one, and you can add an if check and a condition, and even terminal, delay, parse JSON, test summary. It's like really freaking cool.
Sure, I'll try to check that. Thanks for letting me know.
Yeah, thank you for letting me know as well. I really appreciate that. In the chat, people are saying API testing with Postman. That's something I really enjoy, of course. When you're fuzzing directories, post/API/v1/fuzz, you're API testing. Yep, that's true. If you're fuzzing APIs, you're fuzzing API testing. And I would always recommend you guys, if you're testing APIs and it says version 2, check out the first version as well and check out maybe if there's a third version that they're working on, like V1 and V3. Maybe there's something on there. Yeah, some APIs actually do action through the directory, so you're not actually endpoint fuzzing, you're testing the response of the API lol and the endpoint hunting, of course. What you're doing there is URL rewriting. So if the URL doesn't say question mark ID equals, but slash books slash 4, that's a URL rewriting, what they are doing right there. So in the backend, it's still translating it to that slash question mark ID equals, but in the front end, you cannot call that. You are only allowed to call the slash v1 slash books slash 1, for example. So, don't know if that answered your question, James. Thanks for posing it. Really good question. I use Postman in combination with Burp Suite, Self-Attach says. Is that overkill? I really don't think that's overkill, and I'll tell you why. Because I like to automate my requests and bugs that I find, and then I like to run a monitor every 2 weeks because I know that the release cycle in Agile is 2 weeks usually, and maybe it's like a month, maybe it's like 4 weeks. But if they bring out an update, I automatically test it, and it's like, why would I not do that? you know?
Yeah.
And of course, you can also route your requests from Postman through Burp Suite if you want to manipulate them with Intruder, for example. That's all a possibility. But you don't really need Intruder in Burp Suite. You can also just run your collection with like a CSV cheat, for example. That's also a possibility. Yeah, Kiterunner is also awesome.
I use Kiterunner tool, and when it's been I started using it really, it is really great. It identifies the endpoints really fine. And, you don't need to have the word list along with you. So it's along you can get that.
Yeah, that's always such a struggle, right? Finding the
Yeah.
right word list, and it's like
Finding a proper word list and then you're forcing it's like a really hard time for you to do that. But Kaizen has made that thing really easy, and I really love the project of them. And I believe I read a book about that, published by the author. I'm not sure I remember her name.
that. If you remember, feel free to tweet at me. I would really like to read that. Thanks.
Sure, definitely.
And Kick-Ass Videos asks, how do you guys find endpoints on a website? How I find endpoints, I don't know about you guys, but I usually look for documentation like Swagger documentation, and if that's not there, I start fuzzing it. That's usually what I do. I don't know how you look for
I
endpoints.
usually go with the API docs and then try to list out what are the endpoints which can be accessible and not accessible, which are accessible by authentication, and what you can do without authentication, and grab some endpoints all over the application and then try to fuzz along. Go
Yeah,
with the application, trying to understand the application, what you can do with API calls, what if you call with an user internally, what if you change the ID values and trying to call in separate call, and what is if it's like a 302 redirection, what you can do out there, if you can redirect to internally or calling an API internally. And then I try to do some fuzzing all the time. Yeah,
yeah, and like
more fuzzing about.
even if you're fuzzing, even if you have documentation and you find an endpoint, try to make a post request and a put request and try to make different because they don't always put that on the Swagger documentation.
That's true.
And I found that out the hard way. It's like I was testing the whole Swagger documentation. I thought I tested everything, and I was like, "Hey, let me try a post here," and it worked. And I was like, "Oh, I have to retest everything at least once or twice." Yeah, so definitely great question. And James Beers also said asset nodes word list on GitHub is the best and updated every month. So gonna check that out later. I'm really interested in that one.
That's the same word list which is being used in Kiterunner, right?
Okay, so that's the word list. Gotcha. That's interesting.
Yep.
Because like API fuzzing, API attacking is a very strange way of attacking, like API 5, for example, broken function level authorization. Now that might seem like gibberish. It confused me the first time, but this is basically authorization. We talked about authentication, if you're allowed to log in or not. Authorization is if you're allowed to execute a function or not, because this is on a function level. So some attack scenarios are, for example, save settings. You might not be able to save settings. And in the settings, you might have, for example, I'm gonna give you a example that I found in bug bounties. I was testing, I was saving the settings, and in the response it said account type equals X, and I copied that over to my request, and I said account type equals Y, and I changed my account type, and both accounts cost differently, of course, so being able to change your account type was not the intention. That's an example for this one. For example, you can also have like get the documents. A user might not be able to get all documents or get a specific document, but they might be able to export documents instead. That's also one. So as you can see, this sounds a heck of a lot like broken access control, and that's also where this is leading to. So as for the preventative measures, it's always better for this one to separate authentication and authorization modules from the main code to make it easy to implement it wherever you need it. So you can say, oh, here I need access control because only user group X and Y can access this functionality and Z cannot. So that's important that you're able to implement that fast and effectively, so that you don't forget. And it's easy to forget these things because who's to say what needs to be able to be possible and what's not? That's usually the functional analysts, right? And it goes through the whole development chain. And then maybe nobody notices that mistake. Well, then you really have to keep your head in the game, and that's why this is really hard to automate, this vulnerability type. So you
Did you ever try doing an HTTP request smuggling finding a HTTP request smuggling vulnerability?
No, I haven't yet. Like, the vulnerability is something that I need to look into, definitely.
I was looking at DevParams tool, the smuggler.py, and it's really, really good, to try to find some HTTP request smuggling vulnerability. It's automation, but it's really good.
Thank you. I'm definitely you're a source of inspiration for me at the moment. I really appreciate that.
I'm just a follower. So I try to apply the things.
I learn as much from you guys as you learn from me, and I really appreciate that because it really expands my knowledge. But I noticed that I have to note all of these things down in a manner that I can easily search through them because I forget things easily. So I have to really note this down, and in my notes I have to. Right now I'm writing it down, and then I have to transfer it to my notebook. So yeah, thanks a lot, my friend. For this specific issue type, we need to keep two factors in mind: user groups and user authentication levels. Sorry, user authorization levels. Now I'm making the mistake. We have to make sure that these two factors are checked. Only admins can access administrative level functions, for example.
I found the author for the tool, the API fuzzing by Kiterunner. Her name is Alisa Knight. And how do I share the link with you? I think your DM is not public.
Oh no, it's not. But let me. I followed you, so you can give me a DM now. Probably, I think.
Sure.
If not,
Please.
you could just tweet at me or mail me at info@thexssrat.com, or you know where to find me. You can probably find my house and send it on a postcard if you want. If you're a hacker.
I could, but no. I just showed you the link.
All right, thank you, my friend. So you really have to make sure that user group and user authorization levels are tested. To test for that, it's usually wise to at least partially rely on automation for a little bit because you know what's able to be done and what's not. You should use that and put that into like a unit test or something like that as a developer, and make sure that that is enforced, because later down the line, some new developer might come in. They might think, hey, what is this strange if clause here? And they might just throw it away without checking, and then checking it in, up, you have an issue on your hands. All parameters returned by the API should be indexed on a regular basis and tested to ensure that we can edit properties that we cannot edit properties we are not supposed to as a user, which could elevate the account's privilege level, of course. So there's three main ways to abuse this: by manipulating URLs, for example, by manipulating certain parameters, and even by manipulating HTTP methods that we talked about before. And the consequences of this vulnerability are almost always severe. They lead to vertical privilege escalation on the API level. With all of those factors in mind, pay close attention to this issue type if you're a developer. You really don't want this to happen on your application, of course. Now, we are going through this really well. If you guys have any questions, feel free to stop me. I don't have a problem with answering them. I love talking to you, and if you have anything to add, I would love to hear it as well. My public is, you guys are the reason I do this. I just like, there we go. I just like doing all of this to interact with you guys, because I can also talk to a wall, but that's not very interesting. I've tried it. It's not interesting. Believe me, I've tried it for at least 2 hours and the wall doesn't say anything back. It's like, I'm kind of pissed at it. Hey Jamal, how are you doing, my friend? Your speaker is on mute, so I don't think we can hear you. I don't know if you're saying anything.
If I could ask, like, what are you currently working on? Are you doing some bug bounties, or like you're focusing on any research or any white paper?
Mostly, I'm trying to do a lot of pen testing right now because I want to get as much experience in that as possible. And I also do a lot of company visits where I teach their developers very basic tricks about cross-site scripting, CSRF, and all of those things to make them warm for security. And I like to do some research as well because it's necessary, of course. So I try to do some research into the blockchain hacking. I think that's going to be a big thing with NFTs coming up and all of that stuff.
That's true. Alberto and Samantha are going crazy about NFTs. They're speaking talks about NFTs, and I was getting a thing, to get to know about NFTs and the blockchain technologies and cryptos.
Those things are very interesting to look into because they expose a whole bunch of new attack surfaces, and the core of the issue type stays the same, of course, but you still need to understand what's going on. Like, the stupid example that I recently saw was that an attack vector was inserted into I don't know, blockchain transaction wallet name or something like that, and it popped across its scripting in the UI of some application. And I was like, what the heck, guys? Did you not check for it's like HTML entities parentheses done.
That's really crazy.
Let's see here. James Beer says, I feel like fuzzing is not the best way because when it's not on your word list, you will not find it. Yeah, like we've talked about before, Ganesh said it as well. Kiterunner is a good thing for that, and I agree that to an extent, if it's not in there, then you're out of luck, and it might not be the best methodology, but it's definitely a tool in your arsenal, and that's important. It's a weapon. And you have to slay your enemies, so you have to use every single weapon you have. It's like the Ender Dragon. You have to lure it down and then place a bunch of beds and try to sleep in them, and bam. Sorry, I played too much games. At Kick-Ass videos, yes, but fuzzing can generate...
Can we expect a white paper from your research paper or something you're trying to release or anything as such?
I wish I was that good, but it's probably what I'm trying to do is, hexpert.com. I'm trying to make a learning section on there where I'm putting all of these, because I like the OWASP API top 10, don't get me wrong, but what I'm doing here is doing research into exactly what it is, because if you can go and read the OWASP top 10, you will not understand a word of it, I can promise that. It's very confusing, and it's definitely no bad word to any of the OWASP guys. It's amazing research and work that they're doing, but it's hard to understand sometimes, and that's why I try to do these kind of things to make a difference, to have people who don't really understand what's going on, make them understand what they should be testing for. And as for real research, I'm trying to make some time for it, but with the baby, that's not gonna happen anytime soon. It's like little baby rat is keeping me up, so she's not gonna allow that, I'm afraid. But what I'm trying to do right now is the Burp Suite Pro certificate,
Okay.
and also maybe next year. I asked for my boss to give me some budget for trainings, and I got like 4K, so I can get like a proper training, something like OSWE or something like that. I think
Yeah.
I'm ready. I'm not sure, but I think I'm ready. It's like you never know if you're ready, of course.
Well, I haven't done any certification myself, but I got the versatile to know about that. But did you do the Burp certification? How did you feel? Like, did you try doing those labs? Or, like, to do the exam?
Not yet. I bought it for like €8 in a sale, and I'm planning to just do it like next weekend or something like that.
Yeah, me too. I just posted it on the Black Friday sale, and I have to do that. I have to complete that.
Can I
For
be?
that, they were asking the professional key of your Burp license, and
Yeah,
to
but
do.
you have like a 30-day trial, which is also
Yeah.
valid, I believe. So that's something that's possible. And I don't think it should be that hard, unless especially if you've used Burp Suite Pro in the past. Like it's,
Yeah, we've been
but
using Burp Pro from way back 2014 from one.
those were like it
Yeah.
shouldn't be that hard. Those were Uncle Red's famous last words before he failed that test.
True, everyone learned from Burps and labs and all.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Would you tell about your methodology in finding cross-site scripting? I can definitely diverge into that. If there's still time left, I can go into that if that's okay. Gonna keep that for later on, because I want to get through these API top 10 examples, which is my favorite tool to test APIs for vulnerabilities. To be honest, just Postman, because you can bring up 1,000 and million tools,
Yeah.
but while every other hacker is spinning up their tools, I'm manually trying to attack my target and listening to the logic of the application. It's like she's singing to me, and you have to hear her voice.
Yes, that's true.
Sorry, it's late.
Well, yeah, that's true. Really.
Uh,
My methodology, like, I'm not that also guy, who looks more of a cross-site scripting, but I don't know, cross-site scripting finds me, or I find cross-site scripting vulnerabilities, but somehow they eventually get to me. I don't know how's that happening.
like,
But basically, I look for reflector parameters everywhere, and I try using automation. I try using manually, like going around the search patterns and going for the reflector endpoints and input validation fields everywhere. Where I spend some time around to do some process scripting vulnerability. Trying to analyze the injections in JavaScript, trying to analyze the code, and what happens when you're clicking on functionalities and why it's accepting the particular if it's accepting any special characteristic, how to try to evade those functionalities. Is there any bypass for that? Trying to build your own custom payloads, how to do that. So basically, it
yeah,
goes on that, vice versa.
that is definitely important, and it's like you say, the most there is no real trick to finding cross-site scripting except for testing every single parameter to the bone, and people seem to forget that. They think cross-site scripting is throwing an attack vector like a polyglot at a input field, but it's more about finding those attack vectors that you don't see, the hidden fields in form, for example. Those things are usually good candidate. And also look beyond the normal cross-site scripting in the HTML tag injection. Do the HTML tag attribute injection. Do the JS context injection. There's many more things than just the HTML tag attribute. And it's definitely not something that you want to take lightly, but I think you can definitely, as a tester, you have to make sure that if you're testing for cross-site scripting, I just throw a single quote, a double quote, greater than sign, and then I just throw a image source equals X in there, and that's
Me
all
too.
I will throw.
I try to do the manual fuzzing all the time, implementing the characteristics, try to the scripts, and then try to analyze what's reflecting, and then doing the stuff.
Definitely. Yeah, that's definitely important, that reflection. And somebody here said, do you have a kid? If so, congratulations, bro. Yeah, she's about 3 years old and she's freaking full of energy. It's like she has batteries that never run out. And I don't know what to do. And if any of you guys want to babysit, feel free to come over. I am not saying no to that offer. Good luck. I'm working on the Burp certificate to set Andrew Simon. That's awesome. That Burp Suite certificate, I think more people should get it, especially if it's just €8. It's like, why not just try? So Postman over Zap and Burp, cool, thanks. That's definitely something for me. Postman over Burp any day. And the reason is just the versatility. But the thing is, like, if I really have to pick, it's Postman, but Burp Suite comes in so close as a second. It's like I almost can't miss either of them. It's like I need both. And Zap is even more of an addition to that. It's like, why not all of them, right?
Why not a compile of everything?
Yeah, exactly. That's always been my mission, is to just try to go and through as much scanners at my target as possible when I'm pet testing, and then do the manual things myself. Broken access control properly, IDOR, business logic, those kinds of things. And it takes a lot of time to do that. That's why a lot of scanners really helps, and they all fill in each other's blanks, but a lot of them give me false positives as well. And that's why I don't like automation as much for anything really. A lot of these things give me false positives and they waste my freaking time. And of course,
True.
they
With the
sometimes
false
pick.
positives, we go around like trying to figure out if it's true, that's true or not, and spend some time over there. So that's going to break our time.
Definitely. Sorry, by the way, I don't know how we went from OWASP API top 10 to that, but
Yeah, okay, let's come back to the top.
yeah, because somebody in the chat asked before about mass assignment. That's what coming up right now. Mass assignment is a really strange vulnerability type because applications these days, they often rely on objects like users which have properties. We all know that.
Yes.
Sometimes as a user we have authorization to edit and view specific properties of that object, but we might also be limited and not be able to edit or view some other specific properties. For example, we can edit a product stock, but we can see a product stock, but we cannot view the stock of a product, how many items are in stock. So we cannot delete the product stock, we cannot set it to 0, we cannot set it to 50, we can only view it. These properties are then matched to parameters on the front end, and if the conversion happens automatically, they might convert parameters to properties the attacker should not be able to access. This is things like account.accountType, account.discount enabled, account.wallet, product.title. If you're able to view those, then it's okay. But if you're able to edit those, that might be a bigger issue. And that is what my assignment is going to automatically create those properties for that object because it has them in the database, and it's going to make them editable. And while it's not going to map them on things on the front end, if the user decides to enter those values anyway, then they still have an attack on their hands. An example scenario that I can give you guys is I was testing an application, and in the application there was a start date, an end date, a user ID, consultant ID. Now the start date and end date were always for an hour long, and of course you can set that start date and that end date so far apart that you can make an appointment of a few years. That's not supposed to happen. A second example that I can give is that once I look at my account, the request that I have is an end date, a user ID, and a consultant ID, and the response might contain an account type airport, and I might copy that over from the response to the request and change my account type. That's not good, of course. Now, what can you do against that? It's really important that you try to disable automatic mapping of properties wherever possible. All of these properties should properly be mapped manually, in my opinion. I don't know what you think about that, Ganesh.
I do think the same way, like, you have to map manually for those things.
Yeah, like not generate them automatically, right? We have to make sure
Yeah.
that we don't do that. Also, we should not rely on blacklists to block data that the user is not allowed to edit. Because if you rely on a blacklist, I don't know if you guys have seen my talk about YesCon this morning. By the way, I've been up since 5 a.m. and it's almost 1 a.m., so I'm really tired. I showed there that blacklists are really not something that you should rely on. And I'm writing an assignment that you guys can do for yourselves. I've created some space on my FTP that you can upload some files on and test some things out on. And you will see that blacklists are not the end all be all of filtering. We should not rely on functions. We should rely on functions of the framework when blacklisting or whitelisting instead of writing our own. Because of course, writing your own filtering system is kind of difficult. Don't know if you guys tried it, but maybe you should give it a go. And if sorry, go ahead, my friend.
No. I was go
My,
ahead, but continue.
my apologies. So if you have the resources, you should investigate the request and response that reach the API and what properties they can have. Test if the parameters the user cannot edit are actually read-only by sending them a request and trying to edit them. Always test, 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 test. And as a QA engineer, I know I hammer a little bit too much on testing, but I think it's one of the most important aspects of your security arsenal, of course. If you implement security aspects but don't test them on a regular basis, they're not worth quite a lot to me because they can break at any second and you wouldn't even know it. So that's why I hammer on it so much. Now, API 7 is security misconfiguration, and I think this is the last one I'm gonna do. In security misconfiguration, there are several factors that can happen. We should very carefully handle configurations because configurations can give vulnerabilities with different types of configuration combinations in different types of situations. So it's like you might be entering the exact same config on a slightly different system and bam, you have an issue there. It's really important that you handle this well. You have to ensure that all of your systems are up to date and avoid old exploits working on your system, of course. Follow up on that and make sure that all of the date systems are logged and updated real soon as possible. Disable any unused functions such as HTTP methods that you don't need, like put, for example, or delete. And all our data should always be transported over TLS channels such as HTTPS to avoid a man-in-the-middle attack. Make sure that all your security headers are such as CSP are working correctly and configured wherever needed. With CSP enabled, we should also run course policy and configure it properly, or you might open up yourself to security misconfiguration vulnerabilities again. Again, course can also be configured improperly, for example. Furthermore, as a last point, we can claim that security misconfigurations happen when the end user is able to see error messages or warnings. These should only be logged and viewed internally. How to detect them? First of all, it's really important that we look at an overview of our entire application architecture, that we know which systems connect to which and which configurations are applicable there, which writes are in which folder, which secure shell users have been created, etc. Then you also need to make sure that you include everything from printers to smart thermostats to mobile phones to freaking fridges if there's a fridge connected to the network. These days, you should even include watches in your company if it allows smart watches to connect to the network. It's getting crazy. The next thing you know, my freaking vaporizer is able to connect to the smart Wi-Fi network.
True, innit?
And it's like all of these things have to be monitored very carefully. Now that you have everything mapped, of course, you need to scan it for misconfigurations. And I think there again, it's like a harmony of automation with manual testing a little bit. But scanning is definitely you should be doing. You should go over all assets, workflows, and everything else you gathered and confirm that they are configured correctly. You're looking for things like passwords under plain text, unencrypted communications, anything that can indicate a security misconfiguration in that case. So as for hybrid cloud environments and security misconfigurations, don't know if you guys know what a hybrid environment is, but it's been given a bad reputation. It's like where you have partial of your network internally, and another part is in the cloud. And that goes through the internal VPN and through data centers. You have a lot of communication going back and forth. And you can imagine that if you have such complex setup that you're going to be much more vulnerable to misconfigurations. So it's been given quite a bad reputation because they are often present in these environments as well. This can lead to vulnerabilities, and we will go over a few of them. First of all, it's important to encrypt all of the traffic that moves between the networks. That's often forgotten, so a man-in-the-middle attack has no chance. And if you want to set up a complex environment like this, you have to perform a really thorough risk analysis as well to make, but this is often overlooked or not executed due to budget constraints. That's often a problem in companies, I find, budget constraints. But I always tell them, hey guys, you might not have budget for a ethical hacker, but do you have budget for a real attack? That's a different story, right?
They're just waiting for the data breach and to get paid a lot of money to this.
Yeah, definitely. And people don't realize how bad it can get. It's like people think about, and it's normal, of course, because budgets are not unlimited either. It's not like you have an unlimited budget, but ethical hackers are looking to help you. Black hats, on the other hand, are looking to harm you. And that's going to be a problem if you don't have your security in order. Even if it costs you a little bit to get that in order, if you don't have it in order, it's going to cost you a whole lot more. And I've actually made a comparison a while ago. I think there was a data breach at some big company that cost them about $400,000. And I think the most expensive pen test I could find for a similar network was like $40,000 in their area. It's like 10 times more. That's crazy. So some of the example attack scenarios are you have delete enabled where it's not supposed to, and you can delete users, for example. You can post files which might return a 403 forbidden, but your put might not. So you can find passwords being sent over plain text. You can have anonymous FTP enabled. There's a lot of misconfigurations that can happen. Some preventative measures, you have to judge and adjust the security on a regular basis, both on its own and when put into production environment where it's quite complex and interacting with a lot of other servers properly. We have to perform a regular review of our API configuration files. That's important while keeping the whole technology stack that has been used in mind. Yes, my friend Ganesh.
If I could add one thing,
Of course.
even though security is implemented properly, at some time the human error can cause to data breach all of the time. Even there's a proper security in place, but sometimes the human errors, like people like trying to use some pen drives or using the same configuration files, not changing those things, and these might lead to the data breach all the time.
That's true.
Don't you agree?
That's definitely true. The human element plays a big part into this. Also, just basic training. Almost nobody of the developers has had basic security training. So
yeah, that should be implemented for sure.
Yeah, it's like they check in passwords in their Git repositories. It's like, bruh, they should be in like a environment variable or something like that, you know?
Yeah, that's.
And it's like, for these security misconfigurations, these hybrid cloud environments, I've been focusing on them quite a lot because I've been seeing them rise with Corona. And you should be sure that you never use insecure channels of communication between your networks, of course. Automation can help you in detecting some common security misconfigurations. So design and implement a proper strategy to automatically scan your APIs and use scheme-based validation on the responses of the API to validate that they meet the criteria and do not send out misconfigured information like full error messages, for example, like to stack traces shouldn't be sent out. That's also a misconfiguration.
Yep.
We can use, don't allow any HTTP methods that are not needed for the API, like put, delete, blah, blah, blah. And if your API needs to be accessed from browser-based clients, we have to consider implementing a proper CORS policy. Security misconfigurations are really easy to overlook while testing, and they're really easy to get into production, and you can't always do automation for them. You can't always apply automation strategies. If you can, that's definitely a great thing. So use automation as kind of like a sidekick, like another ethical hacker on your side. We have some more questions here. So Kick-Ass Video says you can buy the Burp Suite certificate exam for €8. Yep, I got it in a Black Friday sale, exactly. If you pass now, even you get the €8 back. Yep, before it is December 8th. If you pass before December 8th, you get that €8 back. thexssrat, are you planning on doing some XSS challenges on live stream in the future? If you want, I can definitely do that. You should check out my cross-site scripting live classes. I'm gonna give you guys I'm gonna teach you cross-site scripting. Believe me, whether you like it or not, I'm gonna shove it down your throat. That's not a threat, by the way. Don't sue me on that. Andrew Simon says I usually just use Zap then Burp. That's also a strategy, of course. You can also chain them. If you use Burp Suite free, you can use the Zap spider, the Ajax spider, to populate the Burp Suite side tree. So that's like an example. James Beers says, I love Burp for the pen testing engagement because it gives me a pointer for reflected parameters. Then I kind of go from there, use a Nessus scanner and spin up, get all the URLs. False positives are a lot, yes, but I think when you're just starting out, checking the false positives helps you get used to digging through amounts of data. And definitely true, James. It's annoying to dig through the false positives, but you also learn to recognize them after a while. You're like, oh, it's probably a false positive. You do your little test, and yep, it's a false positive. Let's move on. So it definitely becomes a habit after a while, but that complacency can get bad as well. You don't want to get too complacent in your testing because then you might miss things. It's a catch-22, I think, so we should be definitely careful about that. 12/15/2021 here in Oregon. I got Burp Pro. Awesome. Good luck on the exam, my friend. And good luck you too, Ganesh. Good luck on your exam.
Good luck for you too, thexssrat, and thanks for that.
Thank you. But I don't need luck. I'm the best. No, just kidding. I don't have that big of an ego. My ego is not that big. Only slightly smaller. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add on the topics that we discussed today, because I thought it was quite an interesting discussion. Thank you very much, Ganesh, for weighing in this much. I really appreciate that.
Thanks for having me with me. Thanks, thexssrat, for sharing your valuable thoughts for me.
Oh, thank you. I should be thanking you. Thanks everybody for being here this evening.
Everyone. Take care.
I hope you guys learned a lot, and we will see you in the next one. The next one is probably going to be working through the last few chapters of the OWASP API top 10. Then we're going to try something new. No idea what. Maybe cross-site scripting, maybe CSRF, maybe we're gonna talk about the weather. We will see. Thank you very much for being here, everyone. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you've learned quite a lot. I will see you in the next one, and thanks again, Ganesh, for being here. Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys. Take care. Take care, thexssrat.
Alright, my friends at the live stream, you are still here, but I'm also going to end my live stream here. Thank you so much, because even though it's quite late, there have been so much people. Oh, thank you so much. I mean, it's such a pleasure to have you here as well. And you too, Andrew, you're always in my live streams. Such an amazing guys. I really can't thank you enough for the red pack. See you guys in the next one, and I hope you guys